Hey there, Chris Howard here, talking about what we can do to make sure our organizations are even more resilient as we move forward into the future. One of my core beliefs is in the concept of microcosm, macrocosm, as within, so without. I've been an entrepreneur most of my life. Any type of organization is an expression of the consciousness of the owner or of the founder or the person leading that organization. Famously, Thomas Watson Sr. said, if you're not fired with enthusiasm, you'll be fired with enthusiasm. I love that. If you think of the word enthusiasm, it means infused with godlike spirit. And there's something to be said of infusing that kind of spirit and energy into an organization. The question becomes what truly creates a resilient organization that thrives not only in the great times but through the storms. And God knows we all have storms along the way. And for me, resilience starts from within the individual. As I mentioned before, an organization is a reflection of the consciousness of the person that launches that organization. We can look at whether we're thinking of an individual, an organization of any type, a nation, or even the world on a larger level. We can look at the culture within any particular people, any particular tribe, or the culture within any organization as being analogous to the basis of personality for an individual. An individual has a vision, a mission, a purpose. An individual has values and beliefs, and so does an organization. If we look at a corporate structure, you're going to have a vision, a mission, and a purpose within a corporation. A corporation will have its values, certain attitudes, beliefs, and all of those things make up the corporate culture. From my perspective, it's the job of the leader of the organization to live the corporate values. We see a lot of great examples of that. One of my favorite examples is Richard Branson, who lives the values of the Virgin organization. But really, the Virgin organization is an extension of the values of Richard. That's why they're so closely aligned. And when you think of the values of playfulness and making an impact through the organization and doing things with their cheeky kind of virgin flair, all of that is simply a reflection of Richard's values. So I believe that as we're building an organization, a company, and we'll talk primarily about companies right now, but it does lend itself to all sorts of organizations, that it truly should be an expression of the soul's purpose of the individual that launches it. You could look at that corporate culture as being the basis of personality for an individual. The inner state of the leadership determines the outer performance of the organization. The first insight I'd like to bring to mind is that organizational resilience comes from self-leadership and alignment from the top down. How we as leaders show up is going to determine how everybody else inside the organization shows up. We see that. If you've got a leader that doesn't take responsibility, that pushes the blame onto other people always, that always takes credit where credit isn't due, then what's going to happen is you're going to have a trickle-down effect of that type of leadership, and that's toxic leadership that will eat things away from the inside out. One of the core principles that I'll talk about in terms of self-development is the principle of cause and effect, and that a certain cause causes a certain effect. In life, epistemologically, which means thinking about thinking, we can either be on the cause side of the cause and effect equation, or we can be on the effect side. When we think of being at cause, we think of taking responsibility, taking ownership for those things that happen around us. We've heard before, the buck stops here, right? And when the leader takes ultimate responsibility, then you're going to have a trickle-down effect of that as well, where the people inside the organization will be taught through example to take responsibility. When you've got people taking responsibility for their results, you've got the greatest chances of empowering that organization to produce extraordinary results. When everybody's pointing the finger at everybody else and you've got blame, you've got toxicity from the top down. When we're on the effects side of the equation, we'll have reasons, excuses, blame, shame, and justification. We won't have the results we want inside the organization, but we'll always have a reason or excuse for why we didn't. We'll blame other people. We'll point the finger. Whenever there's one finger pointing out, there's always three fingers pointing back. We'll shame people that are doing better. and we'll justify why we're not getting the results that we want inside the organization. That creates toxicity from the inside out, and that's bound to draw things down. I'm in the personal development business, and in 2008, so many people were saying the economy's so bad. This is being on the effect side of the equation. They're pointing outward at the economy. The economy's so bad that we can't do well. Nobody's doing well. That's justification. Nobody's doing well because of the economy. But the reality is that there's people that do fantastically when the economy's great and when the economy's not so great. And then you've got people that do poorly when the economy's great and when the economy's not so great. Right? And so the question becomes, what's the difference? The difference is the person that takes ownership is the one that's doing great in any type of environment. The person that takes responsibility for their results, regardless of the external market conditions. When everybody else was complaining about the economy, I wasn't complaining about the economy. I said, it's me. If the results are low, if we're getting results that are less than what we've gotten typically, then what is it in my behavior that's creating those results, and what can I change in my behavior to produce different results? It's that level of ownership that allows us to weather every situation and always be playing at the top of our game. So if we're dealt a bad hand, the question becomes, how do we play that hand to the best of our capacity and ability to win the game? When we think that way, we become masters of utilization in life. It's like when life gives you lemons, you make a margarita, right? So you utilize whatever is there to turn it into the best thing that could possibly happen. I'll use Richard Branson as an example of this again because I appreciate his leadership style, and I'll talk a little bit about him throughout the course of our time here together. But there was a situation at one point where he was in an airport and he needed to catch a flight from, I believe it was the British West Indies, and he needed to fly home. And all the commercial flights were full. They had some chartered flights, but he didn't have the money to charter a flight. This was before Virgin Airlines existed, so he took a piece of cardboard, wrote Virgin Airlines on it. He already had Virgin Records and some other companies. He wrote Virgin Airlines on it, put a ticket price on it, and sold tickets for a chartered flight. He was able to charter the flight with the ticket sales, and he made a profit. That's taking a bad situation and turning it into the best thing that could have ever happened, right? And so that's where a master of life is a master of utilization. And when we can demonstrate that and model that for the people around us from an organizational perspective, from the top down, then everybody is given permission to step into that level of performance and those types of results, so that when we get shaken, and there's going to be plenty of times that we get shaken inside organizations. It's happened to me over and over again. But if we can look at something that hits us that most people would shudder at, you go, boy, this result sucks, right? We could wallow in that, or we could say, how do I turn this into the greatest thing that could have possibly happened? I remember the early days when I was doing seminars, this is early days of my career path, and I had this projector that was like a dinosaur, a big projection box, a steel case that I'd lug around. Nowadays you got projectors that'll fit in the palm of your hand. But I had this big steel case. I remember going to one particular presentation in the early days, and the projector broke. It's surprising that I got any presentations out of that old projector. It was a hand-me-down from my previous boss. But the projector broke. I remember calling my business partner at the time, and he's like, now, what are you going to do now? This is going to destroy everything. This is going to ruin everything. I learned to stop calling my business partner because I'd always get that kind of feedback if something went wrong. From my perspective, you don't have time to dwell in the negativity of that. You just got to perform. The fact that there was no projector meant nothing. I was upset by it, but I wasn't going to let it shake me. We got our flip charts out, and we did the best presentation we ever did because we were more connected. The sales results went through the roof, and everything was better as a result of it. So we took whatever was there and we turned it into the best thing that could possibly happen. And it's always been my attitude. There were tough years where I forgot to think like that, right? So just to keep it real and to keep it honest. One philosophy that I've looked to constantly foster and cultivate within my own life was the ability to take whatever situation happened, whatever the results were, and turn it into the best thing that could possibly happen. And I think that's one of the keys to resilience, both individually and organizationally, is to look at whatever life is giving you and turn it into something even better. And that's one of the traits that in studying, I did a 25-year modeling project on the billionaire mindset, and looking at what commonalities they had, what types of traits they had, and how they thought about life and growing their organizations. And it's certainly one of the traits that was always present, the ability to take whatever they were dealt with and turn it into something far greater. Where other people would see a problem, they would see an opportunity. And I know it almost sounds trite, but that's the way to look at it. And the reality is that we're constantly going to be solving problems in life. That's business, right? The willingness to deal with problem after problem and solve those problems in a continuous way. That's what business is all about. When we can start looking at things like that organizationally, that's where we're going to develop the right mindset to be able to go the distance, to be able to have the resilience to get to where it is that we want to go. The formula that we want to think about is to always remember that if we're going to produce maximum results, if we want to empower both ourselves and our organizations to produce maximum results in life, we want to get away from blame, shame, excuses, reasons, and justification, and move from the effect side of the equation to the cause side of the equation, where we're taking ownership, where we've got innovation, where other people might see challenges, where we've got adaptation. And those are some of the keys to the mindset that allow us to really produce results. But there's also another key to resilience from an organizational perspective. For me, that's purpose. When we've got a larger purpose, something that's so compelling, a larger meaning to what it is that we're creating, that's where we're really empowered to produce greater results on every level. It reminds me of a story. There's a guy walking down the street and he sees somebody laying bricks, and the person's laying bricks. They're kind of not very focused in their work. He says, "What are you doing?" The guy says, "I'm laying bricks." So he walks a little bit longer and he sees somebody else being more meticulous in their work. They're laying bricks, but they're really paying attention to what they're doing. The guy says, "What are you doing?" And they say, "Well, I'm building a wall." This guy walks a little bit further and he sees somebody really into their work, working with precision, accuracy, and care. He says, "What are you doing?" And he said, "I'm building a cathedral." The story speaks to the power of purpose and what it is that we're doing. When we're purposeful in our work from an organizational perspective, that's where we really pour our heart and our soul and pour our love into something. And when we're pouring our love, it's been said that love is what makes all things great. Love is what transforms lead into gold in our life. And when we can pour our love into what it is that we're creating individually and then through the extension of our organizations, that's also where resilience comes into play and allows us to go the extra mile. If you look at the early days of Microsoft, they were working 18-hour days. They were working around the clock. They'd pump everybody full of junk food and sodas and let them work around the clock. But the people that were working in the early days of Microsoft loved it because they loved developing software. It was their passion. They were passionate about what they were doing. And when we can drive our organizations forward with passion, that's where we're going to get greater purpose. And when we've got passion and purpose, that's where we get resilience. I've had people come to me over the years in business consulting and say, "Chris, I can't figure out why I'm not motivated to make sales." And I'm like, "Well, let's talk a little bit about what you're doing." And almost inevitably, I'd find that person that wasn't motivated, that person wasn't doing what they were born to do. They weren't following their passion. They weren't on the right path. They were climbing up a ladder that was leaning against the wrong wall. More often than not, you've got a lack of resilience, a lack of ability to go the distance. A lot of people think that they should do what they don't love so they can make the money to one day do what they love. But the problem is that person almost never pours the kind of energy into what they're building that it takes to really make a lot of money. So for me, passion and purpose are closely aligned with resilience. They're like the magic formula to have resilience to go the distance. Napoleon Hill famously talked about the twin forces of desire and faith. And he said that faith is the chemist of the mind that transmutes thought into its monetary equivalent, but desire is the fuel in the engine that drives us forward. That's what allows us to go the extra mile. Warren Buffett famously said that life is like a snowball. What you need is a really long hill and some really wet snow, so that you create a compounding effect, and eventually the floodgates fly wide open. You're rewarded tremendously. From a business perspective, that desire is very important because that's what fuels you. Emotion is energy and motion. It comes from the ancient, or the old mover. In French, it means to move from within. Emotion moves us. So when we're passionate and driven, we're doing something that we're driven to do, that's where we get the resilience to move forward. This is why I say that I believe a business should be the expression of the soul's purpose of the founder, because that's where you get the resilience and drive to go the distance and to really make manifest the vision and mission of the organization. And when we can align a team, the best definition of leadership I ever heard came from Roy Camerano's book, Entrepreneurial Transitions, where he said the inspired leader is the person who can assist others to self-actualize through the accomplishment of a noble vision or mission. When we can align a team for the accomplishment of something grand that we're passionate about, we can create an incredible culture by living the values of the organization and by modeling for everybody at every level how we expect them to show up on the journey to creating something extraordinary. In Microsoft, it was to put a computer on every desktop in every home. That was their goal. And everybody was aligned in that vision, and they were working, and it was being demonstrated to them how to show up with passion, how to show up with that enthusiasm. At the same time, they were unleashing their full potential. They were becoming everything that they could be. So they were self-actualizing through the accomplishment of a noble vision or a noble mission to put a computer on every desktop in every home. When we can align with the philosophy of pouring our passion forward, and we can take responsibility and ownership for our results, we produce maximum results from a resilience perspective. And from that perspective, profit alone from a corporate perspective is fragile. Purpose is resilient. I really turned a corner in terms of my thinking about wealth creation, about business, when I started to look at things from a bigger lens. I was having trouble in my own mind and my own consciousness coming up with, whether I should really be in the pursuit of money or whether I should be in the pursuit of making an impact in the world. A friend of mine suggested that I read the book, The Dynamic Laws of Prosperity by Catherine Ponder. It was a book of spiritual reframes around wealth. One of the things that Catherine Ponder pointed out is that your passion calling is your highest spiritual calling. That passion comes from some place, is the voice of God within. And so I believe that we're all meant to follow our passion, follow our heart, and to listen to that voice of God within. In that sense, following our passion is a spiritual purpose. But then I took it a step further when I started modeling the Billionaire Mind. Andrew Carnegie wrote The Gospel of Wealth. And in The Gospel of Wealth, he said that he believed that it was the duty of an entrepreneur to utilize their entrepreneurial skill set of solving problems in the world to channel the wealth that they created back into the world to uplift the world. He said that he believed that it was detrimental to just will the wealth that we create to our kids, because that's like giving them a lifetime supply of food stamps, which could rob them of their ambition. But it was rather the duty of the entrepreneur to be a good steward for the wealth that they created and to channel it back into society in intelligent ways. And it was Warren Buffett that turned me on to that. And of course, Warren Buffett signed the Giving Pledge, as did Bill Gates and many other billionaires. I know it's out of mode right now with current leadership in the world to have empathy or to think about making an impact or making a difference in other people's lives. There's a lot of me first in the world right now. But the problem with that type of thinking is that it only goes so far. We can ratchet up the meaning of what we do when we think beyond ourselves. And this is my philosophy. And I wrote about this in my second book, Instant Wealth, Wake Up Rich, in 2010. I believe it is our duty, if you will, to follow our heart's desire. And everybody's born for a purpose. I believe we were all born for a purpose, and that we should follow that purpose. And everybody doesn't need to be me or even follow my philosophy. There's beauty in the diversity of life. We've got Celine Dion's, we've got Elvis Presley's, we've got people that have followed their passion but weren't necessarily philanthropic in nature, yet they brought something to the world that was spectacular, that wouldn't have been there had they not been there. And I believe there's a reason for each of us to follow our passion. And I also believe that when we commit ourselves to making a bigger impact in the world, it ratchets up the meaning of our purpose as we're driving forward in life. It causes us to have even greater resilience in our lives and in our organizational lives as an expression of our soul's purpose. When I heard that Warren Buffett was giving back all of his wealth in the form of a charitable foundation, it made a lot of sense to me in alignment with the thoughts of Andrew Carnegie in the Gospel of Wealth. Warren Buffett follows his passion. His passion is building his mosaic, his masterpiece, his collection of entities that he looks at as artistry. That's his love. It just happens to be something that makes him very rich. But he's also made the decision to give all of his wealth back at the end of his life. Andrew Carnegie believed it was the duty of the entrepreneur to give it back while living so they could use their entrepreneurial mindset to help solve global problems. Warren Buffett handled it a little bit differently because he thought, well, if I can compound my wealth at 30% compounding interest over time, that's a unique talent. If I give it back now, it's worth far less than it will be at the end of my life. So he gave it back a little bit later, but he had always made that decision. From a quantum physics perspective, if we make the decision in the here and now to give that wealth back in the future, then in following our passion in the present, we could actually be saving lives in the future because all of our understandings of time, space, matter, and energy lose their meaning at the quantum level. I wrote about that in my book in 2010, Instant Wealth, Wake Up Rich, which was all about waking up to the quality of being rich in the present while we create our dream and make a difference in the future. That's where we really ratchet up the meaning and we create the greatest ability to be resilient when we have greater meaning toward what it was creating. We go back to the story of I'm laying bricks versus building a wall versus I'm building a cathedral. It's purposeful action. And if you could live your every dream and save lives in the future as a result, how meaningful is your work? How meaningful is the purpose of your organization? I remember philanthrocapitalism was all the mode a few years back, not so much now with the current leadership, but to me, there's something incredibly meaningful in making choices like that. At one point, the Virgin companies made a shift in their marketing efforts. They decided rather than focus on the crazy antics of Richard, who would go hot air ballooning around the world and stuff, their marketing was going to be centered in making an impact, making a difference. And they wanted every dollar they were spending to not just make them money, but also make a difference somewhere in the world. For example, with Virgin Mobile in South Africa, they were gifting a phone with every phone that was bought, looking to make communication easier. And at the same time, they were also teaching entrepreneurial classes. Richard was involved with the first free university in South Africa called SEDA, and he was in charge of the entrepreneurial program. He funded the entrepreneurial program out there. The idea was in some charitable organizations, they would do things like microfinancing of loans for solopreneurs that help them get a sewing machine so they could sew clothes and make some money. But Richard's belief was that entrepreneurialism was the way to change the world because then you could create more jobs and it was the way to elevate South Africa out of poverty, which I believed in as well. I remember asking the head of Virgin Mobile, we went out one night in South Africa and I asked him, I had brought 30 coaches out there to do a charitable event for the university. I asked the head of Virgin Mobile, is the strategy to make an impact and make a difference, is that just a marketing strategy to make money? And he's like, why can't it be both? Why can't you both make money and make a difference? And I know that we're living in a day and age where to knock empathy and not caring about other people, that's all the rage right now. But when we embrace that type of philosophy, it ratchets up the meaning of what it is that we're creating, and we're able to create, that's what creates ultimate ability to fall down 4 times and get up 5, because it's so meaningful. Every step you take, every action you take, both on your own and through your organizations, becomes rich with meaning. You want to get up again and again. And to me, that's the key to resilience. Framework to ratchet up your resilience from an organizational perspective is to have a vision that goes way beyond revenue. I did a 20-year modeling project on billionaires, and one of the things I noticed is that for every one of them, almost everyone, there was something much greater than the money. It wasn't just about the money. There was some greater reason, some greater purpose. And when we can be purposeful, we can have greater levels of resilience. When we can be purposeful, we can rally the troops to be resilient with us and to go the distance to burn the midnight oil once again. And so we can look at contribution from that sense as a strategy and think of resilience as being fueled by meaning. There's a famous quote from John D. Rockefeller. He said, "God gave me my money. I believe the power to make money is a gift from God to be developed and used to the best of our ability for the good of mankind. Having been endowed with the gift I possess, I believe it's my duty to make money and use the money I make for the good of my fellow man according to the dictates of my conscience. So, we're not just in our organizations there to make a profit. If we're in a corporate structure, the purpose of a corporation is to make a profit. Otherwise, it's a non-profit. But what I'd like to suggest is that we can move from profit to revolution. Walt Disney said, we don't make movies to make money, we make money to make movies. It was purposeful. It's no wonder that he went the distance when he got shot down with all of his loan attempts from the various banks. We're not just about making money in our organizations, we're creating a revolution. And when we can be purposeful in our businesses and our lives, that's where we can get magic. When we can live the corporate values and demonstrate how to live, that's where we can get magic. When we can demonstrate that it's about more than money in our businesses, that's where we get magic. When we can be enthusiastic, when we realize that the leader is the wellspring of attitude for everybody else in the organization, that's where we get an organization that will be resilience. When we can be the change we want to see in our organizations and be the change we want to see in the world, that's where we get resilience. Resilience isn't a strategy, it's an identity. It's who we are. It's the willingness to fall down 4 times, get up 5, because your purpose is too meaningful to quit. And because your mindset always looks to turn every disaster into the greatest thing that could have happened. That's where we get the gift. My invitation to you is that if you're ready to build an organization that doesn't just weather the storm, but rises above it and creates something even more spectacular because of the storm, then you're in business not just for profit, or you're building your organization not just to make it work, but for the legacy you're leaving behind. And remember, if you look to bring out the best in the people around you and help them to self-actualize for the accomplishment of a noble objective or a noble mission, that makes it even all the more rewarding and ratchets up the meaning even more. So let's build that together in our organizations. Thanks for spending a little bit of time with me here today. And I wish you all the best on your journey, and be resilient.